Hello everyone, and welcome back to Ancient History Jewelry Stories, your favorite niche history podcast, where I have not only severely underestimated the depth of the topic I chose for this month, but have recorded this 3 times now because I forgot to plug my microphone in. I want to make the introduction brief because this is part 2 of a series that I started at the beginning of this month. If you are coming in blind and you have not listened to part 1 of this series, please go back and listen or watch, because this is now permanently also a video podcast, to episode 1 of Influential Women Jewelers. 2 weeks ago, I started discussing influential women jewelers of the arts and crafts movement. I thought I could get away with 1 episode. My research made it clear it had to be at least 2. And now my further research has made it even clearer that it has to be 4 episodes. That's right. There were so many incredibly talented and interesting women producing jewelry during the arts and crafts movement that I get to devote 4 entire episodes to discussing them. As I did my research on the first 3 women I talked about in the first episode, I discovered more and more. And when I did my research on the 2 that we're discussing today, I discovered even more. There's even a chance that there are others to discover. So as of now, I anticipate 2 more episodes about women jewelers of the arts and crafts movement. After I finish the series on the arts and crafts movement, I will be talking about important women jewelers further into the 20th century. In the first episode, we talked about 3 women: Marie Zimmerman, Florence Carey Kohler, and Charlotte Newman, aka Mrs. Philip Newman. In this episode, we're going to be talking about Eda Lord Dixon and Georgie Gaskin. This is entirely by accident. I did not plan this, but both of these women had successful creative partnerships with their husbands. And we do love a woman who finds a partner who supports their art. I am keeping this one a little bit shorter, even though this is now my 3rd time recording it, because by the time this episode is posted, I will be in London. I planned this trip very last minute, which means that I have a lot of preparing and packing to do. I'll be in London to visit the Cartier exhibit at the Victoria and Albert Museum, as well as to go side-eye all of the things the British stole at the British Museum. So if you want to follow along on this trip and you don't already follow me on social media, you can find me on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube under moonhoney.jewelry and on Facebook as Moonhoney Jewelry. There's also going to be some exclusive content from this trip for my paid Patreon members, and I will tell you at the end of this episode exactly how you can find that. So, short intro, which is great news for those of you who have complained about the length of my intros. If you're one of those people, I have a hot tip for you. You can fast forward. And again, if you are listening to this as an audio-only version of the podcast and you want to find the video feed, you can find it on my YouTube and on Spotify. If you are listening to the audio-only version, I implore you to at least take a minute to look up the incredible works of art that these talented women created. So, with all of that aside, let's get into the first woman we're discussing today, Eda Lord Dixon. Born Eda Hurd Lord on November 30th, 1876 in Evanston, Illinois, Eda came from a fairly illustrious Evanston family. Her grandfather, Harvey B. Hurd, was an abolitionist, lawyer, and social reformer, and her mother, also named Eda, was one of Evanston's first successful businesswomen. We don't know very much about Eda's young life, but we do know that she studied art in Chicago. The next thing we know about her is that she married her first husband in 1896. Married to William S. Young on Christmas Day, local newspapers described her as a pretty and vivacious young lady. Eda's jewelry education seems to have started sometime around 1903, when she began studying with James Herbert Wynne. His work included a lot of hammered and pierced metals, and so did Eda's. It seems that she took very quickly to this education because by 1904, she was already exhibiting and selling her work. Between 1904 and 1905, she would exhibit and sell her work mostly in exhibitions, and it included not only jewelry, but other small decorated objects such as handbags and spoons. In 1906, she decided to continue her jewelry education in London, where she would study under Alexander Fisher, the same enamelist and jeweler that Florence Kohler studied with. It seems that at this point, her marriage was already fairly rocky. Her husband William did visit her in London in 1906, but by 1907 they had listed separate addresses as their residence and had seemingly divorced. If you think about how difficult and shocking it was for a woman to divorce in this time period, you can imagine that this was probably a fairly uncomfortable marriage. It did not take long, however, for Eda to meet her perfect match. In 1907, she met Lawrence Belmont Dixon, affectionately known as L.B. He was an MIT graduate as well as a bookbinder, so he was a fellow craftsman. He was also one of the founding members of the Morris Society in Chicago, named for William Morris, one of the founding, if not the founding member of the arts and crafts movement. The Chicago Morris Society was a group interested in modern artistic and social trends. So it is no surprise that Lawrence and Eda hit it off immediately. By 1908, they were married, and shortly after, they moved to California. Despite being all the way on the West Coast, they would continue to be involved with arts and crafts societies in Boston, Chicago, and Detroit. Their life in California seems to have been fairly pleasant and idyllic. They had 2 sons, they tended to an orange grove, and they entered into a creative partnership. From here on out, they would design together, although it seems pretty clear that while the 2 of them were designing, Eda was the one sitting at the bench and fabricating these pieces. By 1910, they were already incredibly successful. In this year, Eda and Lawrence were named as craftsmen members of the Boston Arts and Crafts Society, specifically in the field of jewelry, and the Detroit Arts and Crafts Society had a solo show where over 50 pieces were exhibited and available for sale. Just 2 short years later, in 1912, the Boston Arts and Crafts Society would grant them the title of Master, which denoted excellence in the execution and design of their work. Around this time, they would also win a bronze medal from the Boston Arts and Crafts Society, and one of the fellow medal winners was Elizabeth Copeland, who we will be talking about in one of the next episodes. Shortly after, Eda's work in gold and enamels was exhibited at the Detroit Arts and Crafts Society, and they had this to say. Mrs. Dixon was, during several years, a pupil of Alexander Fisher of London, England, and every piece bears testimony to the perfect technique of his training, coupled with the artist's sense of the relation of gems to settings. Detroit is indeed fortunate in securing work so much in demand. It seems that every mention of Eda's work would go on to laud both her technical proficiency and her incredible taste. In 1916, Eda and Lawrence would go on to win the top prize of $50, which is the equivalent of $1,544 today, from the Artists Guild of Chicago during one of their exhibitions. It's unclear which piece or design won this prize, but I'm sure it was absolutely stunning. Unfortunately, Eda would die fairly young, at the age of 50, in 1926. Although Eda and Lawrence were highly respected in their field during their lifetimes, and their work was consistently praised, there was very little information available about Eda Lord Dixon until 2013. This is the year when the Metropolitan Museum of Art acquired the very piece that made me fall in love with Eda's work, a stunning, enameled silver hand mirror with an ivory handle. Donated to the museum by Jacqueline Fowler, a longtime patron, this piece prompted the Metropolitan Museum of Art to research Eda's life, and they came up with quite a bit. Thanks to their efforts, they were able to recover her papers, sketches, and photographs, as well as interview her children, Robert and Richard. This little mirror also has quite a history. Before ending up at the Met in 2013, it traveled quite a bit. This mirror was initially exhibited at the Arts and Crafts Society of Detroit in 1907, and then again in Chicago in 1908. In 1915, it was shown at the Panama, California Exposition in San Diego, California. And after this, it was featured in multiple design, decor, and art publications. Eventually, it was purchased by the art patron George G. Booth for $250, and he lent it to the Detroit Institute of Arts. It stayed there for over 50 years before it sold at auction for the first time, and when it sold in 2013 at Sotheby's, presumably to Jacqueline Fowler, there were a few extra zeros tacked onto the price tag. The mirror sold for $25,000. It is a truly beautiful thing, and even though it's not a piece of jewelry, the metalworking and enameling is exquisite. The back of the mirror features 4 peacocks interspersed with trees, with a beautiful, nature-inspired enameled blue and green motif in the center. The face of the mirror has an enameled blue and green border around the glass. It's a remarkably romantic take on a fairly mundane object. Thanks to all of the information that the Metropolitan Museum of Art was able to glean about Eda's life, we do have a fantastic quote from her son Richard, which paints a fairly lively picture. Richard said, "Mother was endowed with a delightful personality and made friends easily. Mother smoked cigarettes, at a time when smoking by women was not universally accepted. Mother often used a cigarette holder, and at one stage of her creative career, she made cigarette holders. Very elegant." I love the mental image of this beautiful woman with her signature bun hairstyle, smoking a cigarette out of a long, thin holder that she crafted herself. Between the divorce and the cigarette smoking, she certainly was an unconventional woman for her time period. But so were so many of the other women who worked in the arts and crafts movement. So, what about the jewelry? While, like so many of her contemporaries, Eda pulled influences from various cultures outside of her own. Her work exhibits a distinct Indian, Japanese, Chinese, and Celtic influence. Although influence from Celtic cultures was fairly common in the arts and crafts movement in England, it was not as common in the art coming out of the movement in the United States. Because the Metropolitan Museum of Art was able to acquire her sketches and notebooks, we know that she spent quite a bit of time at museums in London sketching pieces from the 15th and 16th centuries, as well as pieces from India. It's also clear that Eda was quite taken with filigree, a technique that seemed to really capture her imagination during her time in London. Although she seems to have favored blues and greens, like many other enamelists of the arts and crafts movement, she did use other bold, deep colors. She also favored richly colored semi-precious stones, and, like myself, seems to have had a deep obsession with pearls, especially seed pearls. I imagine that some of this love for strands of small pearls had to have come from her admiration for Indian jewelry. Eda was also apparently a very adventurous metalsmith. In 1919, she exhibited 2 rings and a pair of earrings made out of platinum. Platinum was becoming increasingly popular in jewelry at this time. It had been recently discovered, at least by the Western world. Pre-Columbian American cultures were using it for thousands of years. And it had the notable ability to be made into incredibly delicate-looking forms while retaining its strength. It's also a tremendous pain in the ass to work with, requiring very high heat. But that did not seem to deter Eda, who crafted presumably gorgeous pieces using this new and rather mysterious metal. As her work progressed and her design partnership with her husband produced more and more novel ideas, a distinct Japanese influence started to become more obvious in her designs. It's possible that this came from a pre-existing interest in Japanese design, but it's also likely that she became interested in Japanese art because of a trip her husband took to Japan in 1905, where he took over 175 photographs. Taking 175 photographs in 1905 is no small accomplishment. Eda likely turned to these travel photographs for inspiration in her own design work. Aside from expertly executed, richly colored enamels and the recurring use of strands of small pearls, one of the hallmarks of Eda's work was the layering of intricate techniques. She would often combine enamel techniques like cloisonnier, where small channels were made using strips of wire and filled with different colors of enamel, and piercing, where metal is sought out in intricate designs. The juxtaposition of voids and solid spaces can be seen in many of Eda's works, including those where she favored filigree. Of course, as I've mentioned, Eda and Lawrence's designs were not limited only to the realm of jewelry. We have sketches and existing examples of handbags, boxes, chalices. I really think we need to bring chalices back, and very niche items like finger bowls, which you would use to clean your fingertips at the dinner table. Although Eda died young, it is clear that she was a very prolific artist in her lifetime. Thanks to the Metropolitan Museum of Art's efforts to catalog as much information as they could about this talented woman, you can see her notebooks and sketches digitized online. Everything can be found on the Met Museum's digital collections. Looking through the scans of her notebooks, I love to imagine her wandering through the halls of various museums in London, stopping a moment to sketch a new idea, an inspiration, a detail from a piece that has captured her imagination, and see how these ideas would work their way into her own art. Despite a failed and probably rather awful first marriage, Eda did find her partner in love and art in Lawrence. I wish we knew a little bit more about their relationship, but from what I can glean from the quotes taken from her sons, as well as their design work together, it seems that he never attempted to overshadow her abilities. He gave her space to be free in her designs, and most likely had a tremendous respect for her proficiency at the bench. I did want to share one of the sources I used for a lot of this information. While you can pour through the Met's digital archives, a lot of this information was compiled into a lovely article by Antiques Magazine called Eda Lord Dixon Rediscovered. This article was written by Medill Higgins Harvey and Lori Zabar. I will link both this article and the Met's digital collections in the notes for this episode. And now let's move on to our second subject for this episode, Georgie Gaskin. Georgina Evelyn Cave was born on December 8, 1866 in Shrewsbury, England. And unfortunately, we don't know anything about her early life. The next thing we know about Georgie is that she studied at the Birmingham School of Art, where she would meet her future husband, Arthur Gaskin. Arthur was her teacher, but this was not an inappropriate teacher-student relationship. He was only 2 years her senior, and they hit it off and got married almost immediately. Arthur Gaskin was an incredibly talented artist himself, and Georgie and Arthur would go on to become original members of the Birmingham Group of Artists Craftsmen, also known as the Birmingham School. Georgie and Arthur were a successful design team almost immediately. The two of them started producing jewelry together in 1899 and quickly became two of the leading jewelers in the British arts and crafts movement. They would design under the name Mr. and Mrs. Gaskin. Although these episodes are about women jewelers, it's a little hard to separate the two when talking about Georgie Gaskin. Although they did sometimes produce and design independently of each other, the majority of their work was done together. As sort of a flip side to Eda and Lawrence, where Lawrence and Eda designed together, but Eda did the majority of the fabrication, Georgie designed all of the jewelry, but Georgie and Arthur both produced it. Initially, the two had no metalworking experience, and I say this as the highest compliment. It's evident in their work. Because they had no formal training and taught themselves technique as they went along, they did things that others would probably consider inappropriate or improper for fabrication, and it has led to some of the most astonishingly beautiful jewelry I have ever laid my eyes on. I try not to pick favorites when talking about talented artists, but Georgie's designs make me cry. It is rare that I come across work from a jeweler whose designs provoke such a strong emotional reaction within me, but I'm not exaggerating when I say that the first time I saw Georgie and Arthur's pieces, it brought tears to my eyes. Despite the initial lack of technical expertise, Georgie and Arthur became very proficient metalsmiths pretty quickly, and they were not shy about employing others to do things that they didn't know how to do. Alongside jewelry, they produced and designed other objects in silver and enamel, along with illustrations. Arthur Gaskin, specifically, was a very talented woodcut artist. The progression of their jewelry education is pretty evident when you look at the timeline of their work. Georgie's initial designs were pretty simple, and as they became more confident and more capable, they became what I can only describe as encrusted with jewels. Unfortunately, and I feel like this is becoming an oft-repeated phrase, despite being an incredibly talented and prolific artist who left many examples of her work, including illustrated children's books, there's not that much information out there about Georgie Gaskin. There's plenty of information about Georgie and Arthur and their work, but we don't know much about her as a person. She was clearly quite striking in appearance. Here is an enameled portrait that Arthur Gaskin made of his beautiful wife. She looks like a pre-Raphaelite muse, but there's little documentation outside of design sketches. So in lieu of being able to talk about Georgie as a person, let's look at her jewelry, because I do feel like these designs probably say quite a bit about who she was. Initially, I thought some of these pieces looked quietly opulent. But the more I looked at them, the more pieces I found, the more I realized there's nothing quiet about them at all. These pieces, to me, speak to a woman whose personality was not necessarily shy. A woman who adored beauty and understood that sometimes more is more. These pieces embrace an almost maximalist aesthetic, and more than anything, they remind me of antique Austro-Hungarian pieces. Because of the initial lack of training in metalsmithing, the way that these pieces are constructed is actually fairly simple, even though they look rather complicated. Many of these pieces have been sold at auction, which means that there are photos of the backsides, and I love nothing more than to see what the back of a piece of jewelry looks like. The backsides of these pieces show you very clearly how they were constructed. Many of these incredibly intricate, gem-encrusted pieces were made using simple wire scrollwork motifs, which were then built on by adding other components in both silver and gold. I adore the combination of silver and gold, and it seems that Georgie Gaskin did too. While there are many pieces made just of gold with enamel details and color gemstones, just as many of them are made using silver with gold accents. Many of these pieces are reminiscent of Renaissance-style jewelry, especially the necklaces that have additional chains. And some of them remind me also very much of Georgian-era styles. While some of these could be referred to as Renaissance revival, Georgie and Arthur Gaskin's designs don't show as many older historical references as many of their contemporaries. These pieces are incredibly dimensional. While Eda Lord Dixon created a sense of space and dimension by pairing these beautifully intricate enamels with her pierced sawed designs, Georgie and Arthur Gaskin created what look almost like collages. Pieces that started with a background of simple wire scrolls and were added to with layers and layers of what were usually natural details, leaves and flowers. Many of these pieces include multicolored enamel, and somehow They don't serve to make the pieces look any busier, but tie all of the designs together. Like many arts and crafts jewelers, they favored semi-precious stones. And what I found interesting is that many of their pieces also incorporated colored glass. Often, where you see stones that look like emeralds in their work, they are actually green glass. Pearls do make a prominent appearance in many pieces. I feel like pearls did a lot of heavy lifting for arts and crafts jewelry, and in almost all of their pieces, there is a heavy emphasis on nature-inspired designs. I find all of Georgie's designs to be incredibly fanciful and romantic. I think it's clear that the two of them were illustrators. They were approaching jewelry design from a completely different standpoint than a traditionally trained metalsmith. Their designs are not constrained by formal technique and education. And when I keep coming back to the idea that they didn't have formal training, I don't mean that to say that anything looks amateurish. It's clear when looking at these pieces that Georgie and Arthur became very technically proficient. These were incredibly well made. But I do think that sometimes a lack of education is a great benefit when approaching art. I could not find any information about whether or not Georgie Gaskin was actually inspired by Austro-Hungarian jewelry, but the similarities are incredibly striking. I'd have to imagine that she was well aware of it, because of course these styles had been around for a few centuries already, and that she had seen at least a few pieces that inspired this almost maximalist approach to design. I could look at Georgie Gaskin's designs for hours. Every time I see a piece that I haven't seen before, it immediately lights up some pleasure center in my brain that is only satisfied by well-executed maximalism. These pieces, out of all of the arts and crafts jewelry that I've discussed so far, are the ones that I would most like to wear. Despite the fact that they are all nearly encrusted with gems, there is a simplicity and fluidity to their design that makes them so pleasing to the eye. And, coming from a woman who also illustrated children's books, I can't help but think that every one of these pieces looks like they would have been worn by a fairy princess. Georgie Gaskin's designs, and Georgie and Arthur Gaskin's combined work, represents, to me, the farthest reaches of what the arts and crafts movement represented. An otherworldly reinterpretation of nature. And with that, we are ending this episode about women jewelers of the arts and crafts movement. I think both Eda Lord Dixon and Georgie Gaskin were incredibly talented women who also had the great fortune of finding partners who uplifted their abilities and creative talents, and were able to work together with them in order to be successful in their pursuits. Now, I'm not saying that a woman needs a man at her side in order to be a success, but it sure is nice when your life partner is somebody who shares your interests and can come along on the ride with you. I am hoping to be able to see some of these women's beautiful pieces when I'm in London this week. I have made a little checklist of pieces that are displayed at both the Victoria and Albert and British museums. And of course, when I come across any of them, I will be sharing them on my social media pages. Again, if you'd like to follow me on social media where I post shorter videos, usually 3 minutes long or shorter, you can find those on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube under moonhoney.jewelry and on Facebook as Moonhoney Jewelry. If you would like to see the work that I make, because I am a goldsmith trained in ancient techniques, which you should know if you listen to part 1 of this series, you can go to shopmoonhoney.com. If you want to buy some merch pertaining to this video series, you can find some tote bags by going to shopmoonhoney.com and navigating to the Ancient History Jewelry Stories page. In the last couple of weeks, quite a few of you have bought the That Asshole Christopher Columbus tote, which continues to be my best seller. I will be carrying my kleptomaniac Queen Victoria tote to the Victoria and Albert Museum. Hopefully, they won't be too offended. If you enjoy my videos and you find value in the work that I do, and you would like to help support me in continuing to do this, please consider becoming a paid Patreon member. There are multiple tiers of membership with various benefits, including, of course, a shout out to all of my paid Patreon members at the end of every podcast episode. You can find that at patreon.com/ancienthistoryjewelrystories, and I will also be linking it in the episode notes. I hope you've loved this topic so far, because we're not stopping anytime soon. What went from 1 planned episode to 2 planned episodes to 4 planned episodes has become one of my favorite topics I've ever covered. So, after this, all of September will also be devoted to women jewelers of the arts and crafts movement. So far, my list of remaining jewelers to cover consists of Elizabeth Copeland, Jessie M. King, May Morris, Mary Thew, Sybil Dunlop, Doreen Nossiter, and Amy Sandheim. And of course, it's always possible that I will find more women to talk about while I'm in London. As always, thank you for listening or watching, and I'll see you in a couple of weeks for more ancient history jewelry stories. And now it is time to thank my paid Patreon members. Thank you all for your support. I love you from the bottom of my heart. A huge, heartfelt thank you to Jennifer Baker, Amy Radner, Jennifer Crosscree, Mink Rose, Bonnie Glass, Mimi Fondren, Megan Rose Thomas, Stannis Fluoride, Beth, Catherine Elizabeth, Magda Chope, Connor, Michelle Dunphy, Angela Wade, Erin Atkinson, Erin, Liz Bouchette, Flying Chef, Mary Lee, Emmy J. Makes, Julie Spradley, Armored Chocobo, Deborah Hansen, Kate, Dilara Özkar Deschler, Rivka McCormack, Anne-Marie Nichols, Miranda Schaefer, Lindsay Breeze, Sarai, Laura Hastings Brownstein, Tiff, Susanna Ress, Uncle Mike and Aunt Jody, Jason Russ, Molly, Sarah Pounders, Michael D. Clifford, Marianne, Sarah Hackett, Kat Peterson, Carrie, Teresa Hansen, Martha Garcia, Petty Crocker, Jen Gilligan, Laura Rose, Francine Cabreja, Evelyn McElroy, Rose, and Mira. Thank you for your support. It means the world to me.